Hey, so I'm supposed to reflect on project-based learning and some discussions that I've had recently, and I figured I would just do it this way. This is really informal, but it's faster than writing. So first, I've had some seminar discussions, and I usually do this every year. I think it's important to have kids not just in small groups, which is what I normally do, but put them in an entire class discussion. And it's funny, I'm not horribly well versed in Socratic seminars. Somebody told me I'm doing it right, so I just kind of do it more organically. But I have students come up with their own questions for a reading. So we read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, and they're supposed to come up with 3 discussion questions, and we talk about what makes a good discussion question. It's something that you can't just point at one spot of the text and say there's the answer. You know, it has to be something that can be debated. Maybe something that refers back to previous readings, saying, you know, how would Franklin and so have gotten along based on what you've read, that sort of thing. And so we talk about what would make a good discussion question, and then I sit back and let the students lead, and I tell them, you know, a lot of them it makes them uncomfortable, but I'm like, you have to do this. I remember in college I had one professor that every single class was like a Quaker meeting, and not kidding, Great Awakening, he literally sat there, he said, the Great Awakening was neither great nor an awakening discuss. And he folded his arms, sat back in his chair, and stared at us for the next 3 hours while we had to very awkwardly take on that conversation. So I think it's good for them to learn how to be in that uncomfortable space and to know how to contribute well. That you can't just say, oh yeah, I agree with that, but you have to actually point people back to the text. And so that's how I grade them. Like, are you pointing back to the text? Are you adding something new? But one thing I've struggled with this year is I have some pretty big classes. And I know I'm at a private school. It's not as big as a public school would be. But I do have a class with every single desk filled, 22 people in one class. Another class that's really quiet. I can't even get them to say their opinion. They're just a quiet bunch of kids. Also fill almost every single desk in the room. And I'm like, man, how do you have a solid graded discussion when you have a class, number one, that's super quiet, but number two, when you have one that fills every single desk? Like, how do you make sure that every single student gets a chance to talk, and how do you help the students police themselves? Because I do have a few students who will fill any void. They're over talkers, in some cases debaters, and so I came up with my genius plan this year, and I have to say I love it. It worked out well. I gave every student a Starburst. Now, I am not a teacher that rewards kids for speaking. I'm like, no, you don't need candy, as I don't throw them candy whenever they talk in class. But I gave them all a Starburst because it's colorful and it's individually wrapped. So that's, you know, germs. Ooh. But they were supposed to put this Starburst on the edge of their desk where everybody could see it in the classroom. So we have all of our desks kind of in a big circle, and everybody has a Starburst. And once you have said something, once you've contributed to the conversation, you take your Starburst and you move it. You can eat it if you want. Most of them did. If you didn't, and that's fine, you don't have to eat it. But it's there more as a visual. And what I loved about this is I never had to interject and police the conversation at all. If 2 students started to speak at the same time, they would actually both immediately glance to see who had a Starburst. And if one of them still had a Starburst at their desk, the other one would go, oh, no, you go first. You go first. Towards the end of the discussion, I had one student that hadn't spoken at all, and this lone Starburst sitting out there at his desk, and his friends see this, and they actually all pause the conversation, them, not me, and they say, hey, dude, we care about you. Do you have any questions for us? Do you have anything you want to add? Just an opinion, anything, because they knew that you had to contribute something to get points. And so because of this little gem right here, they were able to police themselves. It was the most balanced conversation that I think I've ever had in a class, despite the challenges that we had facing us. So that, pretty amazing. Other thing going on this week is I have a projects-based learning unit that's happening this week, and it's funny, I was torn between, do I do groups of 3 or groups of 4? And in my mind, groups of 3 were actually a better option because you're not going to have kids mooching as much. Everybody's doing their fair share of work. And here's what I found. I was dead wrong. I have one class where I'm doing groups of 3. Oh, Let me fix that. One class where I'm doing groups of 3, one class where I'm doing groups of 4. And what I found is that in my class where they're in groups of 4, there's fewer groups for me to meet with, and so I'm able to give each group an adequate amount of time. And it's been great. Man, I've created these concept videos for them. They're having to do research, and so I'm able to go and actually sit down with this group, talk through the things they don't understand, listen to their questions, provide feedback, and it's great. I don't feel rushed and pulled. In my class where I have groups of 3, there's several more groups, and so what I find is that I can't get to everybody. Everybody's going, Miss Stone, Miss Stone, Miss Stone, and I cannot get to all of them, and therefore my confidence in their understanding the material is much less because of the lack of face-to-face time. Now, ironically, that group is actually performing better right now, I think, overall. I think it's just the motivation of the students, for the most part, in that group. But I think in the future, what I'll do is definitely do groups of 4, make it a manageable enough. It's not about the number of people in the group, I guess is what I'm saying. It's about how many groups there are and thinking of how spread am I? Am I being too spread thin, or is it a reasonable amount? And the other thing I've realized is, man, project-based learning takes time. What I would do next year, I gave them a goal, like a checklist of learning objectives. Instead of that, they don't care about that. Next year, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a checklist of all of the different checkpoints that I've got to sign off on so that they can visually see it. And I'm also going to have a spot where they have to write due dates. Now, some things are hard due dates, like you have to have this done by this day. Other things are soft due dates. And you know, when I was going around to the groups, I was suggesting to them it would be wise for you all to agree to make this homework, and that you come back together. You know what I found? Nobody took my suggestion at all. They are only using class time to get this done, and that's going to bite them in the tail later on. But I think maybe by forcing them to write down due dates and then even holding them accountable to, did you have what you said you would have completed by the due date that you suggested, that's another way for me to assess them while still allowing it to be self-paced. And so I've learned a lot through this process of how I might do it again, but I will say this, project-based learning for my first time, I'm so excited. What they're doing is they're taking concepts of how do we see the colonies go from being super diverse to united, and how do we take the same concepts that the colonies use, those same ideas, things like the public sphere, consumer revolution, religious awakening, how do we transfer that to our school community to make our school community more united? And they're actually coming up with a deliverable that they're going to be presenting to some key leaders in our school to hopefully make our school community more united. And the ideas that they're coming up with are fantastic, but what's even more fantastic is seeing them get excited about history and saying, like, they're getting excited about, oh, well, you know, during the Great Awakening this happened, and Benjamin Franklin, he used the public sphere in this way, so what if we use the public sphere? And to hear them talk about things like the public sphere and get excited about it, I mean, over the moon. So that is, we're probably 3/4 of the way through. I'll have to do another reflection when we are all the way through, but there you go. That is what I have learned over the last few weeks when it comes to discussion and group projects. The kids are about to enter my room, so I better sign off.